it is a popular show, and it's great. I really love doing it, and my character is, I actually love doing what I'm doing now because my character is really obsessive.
Ever wonder if some sitcom roles are just too good to be true? Truth be told, sometimes an actor lands a character so perfect, so hilarious, that they get stuck in a TV time loop forever. We're talking about the actors who became so iconic in one role that it's hard to see them as anyone else. And believe me, you'll be shocked to find out which actor played the same character for 20 years straight. 1. Jaleel White as Steve Urkel on Family Matters.
Hi, Laura! These are for you!
Let's kick things off with the absolute king of sitcom typecasting, the poster child for a character completely taking over an actor's life. We're talking, of course, about Jaleel White and the one and only Steve Urkel. Believe it or not, when Family Matters first started, it was a pretty standard sitcom about the Winslow family. Jaleel White wasn't even supposed to be a main character. He was hired for a single guest spot as the family's nerdy, clumsy, and hopelessly annoying next-door neighbor. He shuffled in with his high-waisted pants, suspenders, oversized glasses, and that unforgettable, nasally voice, and delivered his iconic line asking if he was the one who did that. The studio audience went absolutely wild. The reaction was so huge that the show's producers knew they had lightning in a bottle. What was meant to be a one-off appearance turned into a recurring role, and before you knew it, Steve Urkel was the undeniable star of the show. The entire focus of Family Matters shifted from the family to the family's wacky neighbor. Every week was a new adventure in Urkelnomics. He'd invent something that would go horribly wrong. He'd try to win the heart of Laura Winslow with some grand, disastrous gesture. Or he'd transform into his suave alter ego, Stefan Urkel, inside his transformation chamber. The character was a pop culture phenomenon. There were Urkel dolls, lunchboxes, and even a cereal called Urkel Os. He was everywhere. But here's the tricky part. For Jaleel White, this was both a blessing and a massive curse. The thing is, he was a talented young actor, but he became so completely fused with Steve Urkel that the public couldn't see him as anyone else. The voice, the walk, the glasses, it was an identity he couldn't shake. After the show ended, he found it incredibly difficult to land serious roles. Directors and audiences would look at him and just see the clumsy kid who always broke things. He has spoken openly about the challenges of growing up as one of the most famous nerds on the planet and the struggle to be seen as a serious actor afterward. He is the ultimate example of a character becoming so big, so iconic, that it completely and permanently defines the actor who played him. 2. Alfonso Ribeiro as Carlton Banks on The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air.
Will, take my hand, come out of the ghetto, and take a stroll down Wall Street.
If Steve Urkel owned the nerdy catchphrase of the 90s, then Carlton Banks surely owned the decade's dorkiest dance. On The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, Will Smith was the cool, street-smart kid from Philly, but his perfect opposite was his cousin Carlton, played with genius comedic timing by Alfonso Ribeiro. Carlton was the ultimate preppy, a rich, stuffy, and hilariously out-of-touch kid who loved Tom Jones, sweater vests, and following the rules. He was the perfect foil to Will's rebellious nature, and their dynamic was the heart of the show. What truly cemented Carlton in the Pop Culture Hall of Fame, however, was his signature dance. Whenever he heard his favorite Tom Jones song, something magical would happen. He'd break into this goofy, arm-swinging, hip-swaying dance that was the physical embodiment of his personality. Enthusiastic, a little bit awkward, and completely unself-conscious. That dance became a global phenomenon. It was the kind of thing you'd see people doing at weddings, school dances, and parties for years to come. Ribeiro himself has said he cooked up the dance by combining moves he saw from Courtney Cox in a Bruce Springsteen video and from Eddie Murphy's classic stand-up comedy. It was a stroke of comedic genius. The problem is, the dance was too iconic. Alfonso Ribeiro is a talented actor and dancer. He even won Dancing with the Stars, but he will forever be Carlton Banks. He's been asked to do the dance on countless talk shows, at public appearances, and probably by strangers on the street. It's the one thing everyone wants to see. Much like Jaleel White, Ribeiro found himself in a gilded cage. He had created something universally loved, but it also put a permanent label on him. No matter what role he plays, from hosting America's Funniest Home Videos to other acting gigs, the shadow of that sweater-vested, dancing preppy from Bel Air is always there. He's not just an actor, he's the guy who does the Carlton. 3. Jim Parsons as Sheldon Cooper on The Big Bang Theory.
Once again, you've fallen for one of my classic pranks. Bazinga.
Fast forward a couple of decades from the 90s, and you'll find the modern king of lovable, yet infuriating sitcom nerds, Dr. Sheldon Cooper. When Jim Parsons first auditioned for the role on The Big Bang Theory, the show's creator, Chuck Lorre, was apparently so blown away he needed to see the audition a second time just to believe it was real. And you know what? It wasn't a fluke. Parsons had perfectly captured a character that, on paper, could have been completely unlikable. Sheldon was a theoretical physicist with a genius-level IQ but zero social skills. He was arrogant, obsessive-compulsive, and lived by a rigid set of bizarre rules, like his famous spot on the couch. And yet, audiences fell in love with him. Parsons played Sheldon with a strange kind of innocence. He wasn't mean. He just genuinely didn't understand sarcasm, social cues, or why you couldn't tell your friends that their new haircut was a follicular disaster. His famous declaration of a successful prank, Bazinga, became a cultural touchstone. His Soft Kitty song, his Fun with Flags web series, and his detailed roommate agreement were all beloved quirks that made the character a global sensation. For 12 seasons, Jim Parsons was Sheldon Cooper, earning him 4 Emmy Awards and making him one of the highest-paid actors on television. The show was a ratings juggernaut, largely thanks to his unforgettable performance. But playing such a unique and specific character for over a decade comes with a price. Sheldon's mannerisms, like his stiff posture, his rapid-fire scientific way of speaking, and his childlike cluelessness, are so deeply ingrained in our minds that it's nearly impossible to separate the actor from the role. When you see Jim Parsons in an interview, you're almost surprised to hear his normal voice and see him act like a regular person. He has tried to branch out, taking on roles in movies and on Broadway, but the ghost of Sheldon Cooper follows him everywhere. He is so completely and utterly associated with that one brilliant, socially inept physicist that for a generation of TV viewers, Jim Parsons is Sheldon Cooper. 4. Jason Alexander as George Costanza on Seinfeld.
A marine biologist?
Yes.
Why am I a marine biologist?
If Sheldon Cooper was a genius who couldn't understand people, George Costanza was a self-proclaimed short, stocky, and slow-witted bald man who understood people all too well and used that understanding to make his own life miserable. On the legendary sitcom Seinfeld, Jason Alexander played Jerry's best friend, a character based on co-creator Larry David himself. George was a master of failure. He was cheap, dishonest, insecure, and spectacularly lazy. He was the kind of guy who would pretend to be a marine biologist to impress a woman, only to have to save a beached whale. He was the guy who got a job with the New York Yankees and then tried to take a nap under his desk. Alexander's performance was nothing short of brilliant. He wasn't just reading lines, he was channeling a primal level of human anxiety and pettiness. Every frustration, every lie, every scheme was written on his face and expressed through his frantic, flailing body language. George Costanza was a walking disaster, but he was our walking disaster. We saw our own worst impulses in him, and it was hilarious. He was the id of the show, constantly giving in to his worst instincts, whether it was double-dipping a chip or pushing women and children out of the way during a fire. He was, as he once famously declared himself, the true lord of the idiots. The role made Jay's son Alexander a star, but it also put him in a creative straitjacket. The character of George was so strong, so vivid, and so utterly pathetic that it became his defining feature. After Seinfeld ended, Alexander struggled to find roles that didn't feel like a pale imitation of George. He would show up in a movie or another TV show, and audiences would just see George Costanza in a different costume. He has spoken about his frustration with being typecast, even mentioning that he once told his agent he would be fired if he ever received another script for a short, bald, funny character. He's a talented Broadway singer and a skilled dramatic actor, but to millions, he will always be the guy who complained about a certain infamous swimming pool incident. 5. My Cool Richards as Cosmo Kramer on Seinfeld.
I'm completely changing the configuration of the apartment. You're not going to believe it when you see it. Whole new lifestyle.
You couldn't have Seinfeld without Cosmo Kramer. He wasn't just a character, he was a force of nature. Whenever Jerry's apartment door burst open, you knew chaos was about to follow. My Cool Richards created one of the most unique and physically brilliant characters in television history. Kramer was the ultimate wacky neighbor, a man with no visible means of support, a wild vertical hairdo, and a wardrobe of vintage clothes that looked like they came from a 70s time capsule. He was a man of a million get-rich-quick schemes, from a make-your-own pizza restaurant to a cologne that smelled like the beach. Richards' performance was almost entirely physical. It was in the way Kramer would slide into Jerry's apartment, his limbs flailing like a marionette with its strings cut. It was in the way his face would contort in shock or excitement, his eyes wide and his hair seeming to stand up even straighter. It was the spastic full-body shudder he'd do when he tasted something bad, or the way he'd gesture wildly while explaining his latest insane idea. He won 3 Emmy Awards for the role, and every single one was deserved. His enthusiastic exclamations and his famous complaint about the pretzels making him thirsty became instant classics. However, Richards' fusion with Kramer became one of the most extreme cases of typecasting ever. The character was so out there, so singular, that it was impossible for audiences to accept him as anyone else. Any attempt at a different role was jarring. But the situation became even more complicated after a widely reported incident during a stand-up comedy set in 2006, where he used incredibly offensive and hurtful language, which essentially ended his mainstream career. That incident, unfortunately, cemented his public persona. Now, when people think of My Cool Richards, they often think of 2 things: the zany, lovable Kramer, and the man from that terrible video. It ensured that Kramer would be not just his most famous role, but his final major public act, forever defining his legacy in a complex and tragic way. 6. Kelsey Grammer as Dr. Frasier Crane on Cheers and Frasier.
I love my new life. I love the solitude. I miss Frederick like the Dickens, of course.
Playing a character for 11 seasons on a hit show is a surefire way to get typecast. But what about playing that same character for 20 seasons across 2 different blockbuster sitcoms? That's a level of typecasting that's almost unheard of, and it's the legacy of Kelsey Grammer and his iconic character, Dr. Frasier Crane. We first met Frasier as a recurring character on the legendary Boston sitcom Cheers. He was a stuffy, intellectual psychiatrist who served as a romantic rival, and later, a barstool buddy for the main cast. He was the perfect highbrow contrast to the blue-collar regulars of the bar. When Cheers ended, the creators decided to take a huge gamble. They gave this supporting character his own spin-off series, Frasier. The show moved the character to his hometown of Seattle, where he hosted a psychology radio show and had to deal with his equally stuffy brother, Niles, and his down-to-earth father, Martin. The show was a massive critical and commercial success, running for another 11 seasons and winning a staggering number of Emmy Awards. Graham Mayr's performance was the anchor. He made Frasier's pomposity, his love of fine wine and opera, and his constant frustrated cries of being emotionally wounded, both hilarious and strangely endearing. For 20 consecutive years, from 1984 to 2004, and returning in a 2023 revival, Kelsey Graham Mayr was Frasier Crane. It's one of the longest-running character portrayals in American television history. As a result, the line between actor and character has become almost non-existent in the public eye. Graham Mayr has a distinctive booming voice that is instantly recognizable as Frasier's. He has done other work, most notably as the voice of Sideshow Bob on The Simpsons, but even that character is an evil, twisted version of the same intellectual persona. He is so completely intertwined with the role that trying to see him as a tough action hero or a simple farmer would be a mental challenge for any viewer. He is, and perhaps always will be, Dr. Frasier Crane, listening to Seattle's problems. 7. Ed O'Neill as Al Bundy on Married with Children.
What? You gave some to Bud, you have to give to Kelly too. Remember, Al, no favoritism.
Hey, she's going out with a guy named after a reptile.
Before he was the lovable patriarch Jay Pritchett on Modern Family, Ed O'Neill was another, far more miserable TV dad. For 11 seasons, he was Al Bundy on the groundbreaking and controversial sitcom Married with Children. Al was the polar opposite of the warm, fuzzy sitcom dads of the 80s, such as Mike Seaver. He was a deeply unhappy women's shoe salesman from Chicago who hated his job, his life, and, most of the time, his family. His glory days were long behind him, a high school football game where he scored 4 touchdowns in a single game, and he never let anyone forget it. Al Bundy was a cultural icon of misery. His signature pose was sitting on the couch, one hand tucked into his waistband, watching TV and lamenting his pathetic existence. He despised his lazy wife, Peg Gee, his ditzy daughter, Kel Lee, and his perpetually failing son, Bud. The show was a dark, cynical, and hilarious takedown of the perfect American family, and Al was its bitter, wisecracking center. He was the founder of an anti-feminist club for men, which gives you an idea of his whole vibe. He was crude, he was cheap, and he was a glorious loser. For over a decade, Ed O'Neill was Al Bundy. The role was so powerful and so defining that it seemed impossible he would ever escape it. For years after the show ended, any role he took was seen through the Bundy lens. He was the guy who sold shoes and hated his wife. But then something amazing happened. In 2009, he was cast in Modern Family. At first, many people were skeptical. Could Al Bundy really play a wealthy, sophisticated family man? The answer was a resounding yes. His role as Jay Pritchett earned him critical acclaim and introduced him to a whole new generation. It's a rare case of an actor partially breaking a powerful typecast. But even with that success, for anyone who grew up in the 90s, the image of him on that ugly couch, complaining about his life, is burned into their memory. He may have a second act, but Al Bundy will always be his defining masterpiece of misery. 8. Ray Romano as Ray Barone on Everybody Loves Raymond.
I'm going to the bank, all right? Listen, when the buzzer goes off, could you maybe take the clothes out of the dryer?
Yeah, no problem.
Here's a quote from the real-life comedian Ray Romano. "I'm a sports writer from Lynbrook, Long Island. I have a wife, a daughter, and twin sons. My parents live across the street, and my brother, who's a police officer, lives with them." Now, what was the premise of his hit sitcom, Everybody Loves Raymond? It was about Ray Barone, a sports writer from Lynbrook, Long Island, with a wife, a daughter, twin sons, parents who live across the street, and a police officer brother who lives with them. You see where this is going. There has never been a sitcom more directly ripped from an actor's own life. The show, which ran for 9 incredibly successful seasons, was based almost entirely on Romano's own stand-up comedy and his real family dynamics. Ray Barone was the quintessential put-upon husband, constantly caught in the middle between his sarcastic wife, Deborah, and his meddling, overbearing family. His mother, Marie, was a master of passive aggression. His father, Frank, was a loudmouthed slob who never wore pants, and his brother, Robert, was a giant man-child perpetually jealous of Raymond's success. At the center of this chaos was Ray, with his whiny nasal voice and his constant look of bewildered defeat. Because the show was so personal, Ray Romano and Ray Barone became one and the same. The actor wasn't just playing a part, he was essentially playing a slightly exaggerated version of himself. His real-life brother was even a consultant on the show to make sure Robert's character was accurate. This made the show feel incredibly authentic and relatable, which is why it was so beloved. But it also means that Ray Romano will never be seen as anyone other than Ray Barone. Even when he lends his voice to Manny the Mammoth in the Ice Age movies, you hear Ray Barone's voice coming out of a woolly mammoth. He's tried other more dramatic roles, like in the show Vinyl or the movie The Irish Man. But for millions of people, he will always be that guy from Long Island, rolling his eyes while his mom rearranges his silverware. 9. Jerry Seinfeld as Jerry on Seinfeld.
I hate clothes, okay? I hate buying them. I hate picking them out of my closet. I can't stand every day trying to come up with little outfits for myself.
This one is the ultimate meta example of typecasting, a real snake eating its own tail situation. Jerry Seinfeld, a successful stand-up comedian, co-created a sitcom called Seinfeld, in which he played the main character, a successful stand-up comedian named Jerry Seinfeld. The show, famously known as The Show About Nothing, revolved around the tiny, everyday annoyances of life in New York City, as observed by Jerry and his group of deeply neurotic friends. Each episode was bookended by Jerry performing his actual stand-up routine in a comedy club, often commenting on the very themes that would play out in the episode's plot. The character of Jerry was the calm, observational center of a chaotic universe. While George, Elaine, and Kramer were having emotional meltdowns, getting into absurd fights, and hatching bizarre schemes, Jerry was usually the one standing off to the side with a smirk, making a dry, witty comment about the absurdity of it all. He was a neat freak, a Superman fan, and had a seemingly endless string of girlfriends with whom he would find some tiny, ridiculous flaw to justify breaking up with them. The character was, by design, the actor himself. He wasn't stretching his acting chops. He was just being Jerry. As a result, it is physically impossible to typecast Jerry Seinfeld because he is the typecast. He created a show that was a perfect vessel for his exact comedic persona. When the show ended its 9-season run as one of the most popular and influential comedies of all time, Jerry Seinfeld didn't really try to become a different actor. He didn't take on dramatic roles or try to play a different character in another sitcom. Why would he? He went back to being a full-time stand-up comedian, the very thing he was doing on the show. His entire public identity is so completely and masterfully merged with the character he played that there is no difference between them. When you see him today in his show, Comedians in Cars Getting Coffee, you're not watching a former actor. You're watching Jerry Seinfeld being Jerry Seinfeld, just as he always has been. 10th, David Schwimmer as Ross Geller on Friends.
Hi.
In the epic sitcom battle of the 90s, if Seinfeld was the show about cynical friends, Friends was the show about friends who were more like family. And at the emotional, often whiny core of that group was Dr. Ross Geller, the paleontologist with a heart of gold and a laundry list of failed marriages. Played by David Schwimmer, Ross was the group's resident intellectual and hopeless romantic. His life was a series of unfortunate events, from his first wife leaving him for another woman to accidentally saying the wrong name at the altar during his second wedding. Schwimmer's performance was a masterclass in sad sack comedy. He had a hangdog expression and a way of delivering his panicked defense that he and Rachel were on a break with such intensity that it became one of the most quoted situations in TV history. Ross could be sweet and loving one moment, and then comically intense and possessive the next. Just think of the infamous sandwich incident, or his disastrous attempt to pivot a couch up a flight of stairs. Schwimmer infused the character with a vulnerability that made you root for him, even when he was being completely ridiculous. For 10 seasons, the on-again, off-again romance between Ross and Rachel was the will they or won't they engine that powered the entire show. Playing such a beloved, yet emotionally fragile character for a decade left an indelible mark on Schwimmer's career. The sad Ross persona stuck to him like glue. After Friends wrapped, he seemed to deliberately step away from the spotlight, focusing more on directing and theater. When he did take on acting roles, it was often difficult for audiences to shake the image of the dinosaur-loving, thrice-divorced romantic. He even voiced a neurotic giraffe named Mel Min in the Madagascar movies, a character that felt like an animated version of Ross. Despite a critically acclaimed performance as Robert Kardashian in The People vs. O.J. Simpson, for an entire generation, David Schwimmer will always be Ross, forever stuck in second gear. 11. Courtney Cox as Monica Geller on Friends.
They just, I'm obsessed about, at one point I want to have a baby, and I'm obsessed about that, and I want to make jam, or...
Every group of friends has the mom of the group, and on Friends, that role belonged to Monica Geller. Played by Courtney Cox, Monica was the high-strung, obsessively clean, and fiercely competitive chef who held the group together. Her apartment, with its iconic purple walls, was the main hangout spot, and she was often the one cooking, cleaning, and organizing everyone's lives. Her defining trait was her intense need for order. She labeled everything, had categories for her towels from everyday use to fancy guest, and would scrub a stranger's car if she saw a spot on it. Cox's performance was brilliant because she made Monica's neuroses both hilarious and lovable. You laughed at her famous shriek of excitement, and you felt for her as she navigated her career, her family issues, since her parents openly favored her brother Ross, and her search for love, which she ultimately found with Chandler. Monica was the responsible one, the one who craved a perfect, orderly life, and Cox played that desperation with a manic energy that was a cornerstone of the show's humor. Before Friends, Cox was known as the girl from the Bruce Springsteen video, but the role of Monica catapulted her into global superstardom. Like the rest of the cast, however, she became permanently fused with her character. Monica's neat freak, control freak personality was so strong that it defined Cox's public image. After Friends, she starred in the sitcom Cougar Town, where she played a newly single woman in her 40s. While the show was well received, many people saw her character as just a slightly messier, wine-loving version of Monica. For 10 years, she inhabited that character so fully that the line between actor and role blurred. No matter what she does, from horror movies like Scream to other TV projects, for millions of fans around the world, she will always be Monica, the one who probably cleans her Emmy Awards with a special polish. 12th, Neil Patrick Harris as Barney Stinson on How I Met Your Mother.
Have you met Ted?
What? No, we're not playing Have You Met Ted?
Hi, have you met Ted?
Hi, I'm Ted.
Sometimes a supporting character is so dynamic and well-written that they completely steal the show. That's exactly what happened with Barney Stinson on How I Met Your Mother. The show was supposed to be about Ted Mosby's search for his future wife, but it was his best friend Barney, played with electrifying charisma by Neil Patrick Harris, who became the show's breakout star and cultural icon. Barney was a high-functioning, suit-wearing master manipulator whose life's mission was to charm as many women as possible using an elaborate set of rules and schemes outlined in his sacred text, the Playbook. Harris, who had previously been known as the child actor from Doogie Howser, M.D., completely reinvented himself with this role. He made Barney more than just a simple womanizer. He was hilarious, he was surprisingly loyal to his friends, and he had a collection of catchphrases that became part of the modern lexicon. His classic lines, like asking women if they had met his friend Ted, his command to suit up, his gleeful acceptance of any challenge, and of course, his signature phrase that something was going to be legendary, often with a dramatic pause, were repeated by fans everywhere. Barney was a larger-than-life cartoon character in a live-action world, a man who believed his own hype and lived by a code of awesomeness. The role was a massive comeback for Neil Patrick Harris, making him a huge star all over again. But it also typecast him in a brand new way. He became so synonymous with the slick, fast-talking, impeccably dressed Barney that it was hard to see him as anything else. The character was so specific and so beloved that it overshadowed his other work. He's a gifted singer, a Tony-winning Broadway star, and a fantastic host, but the shadow of Barney Stinson looms large. People expected him to be that witty, suit-wearing guy in real life. It's a testament to his incredible performance that he was able to create a character so vivid, but it also means that for a generation of viewers, he will always be the guy who would never, ever be caught wearing a ducky tie.